How
The
could
plate
you?
I
shattered
told you
against
it
the
was
kitchen
over.
tiles before Amara even realized her hand had let it go. "Say it again," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Say it to my face, Femi." Femi stood at the doorway, car keys already in his hand, his suitcase packed and waiting by the front door like he'd rehearsed this exit for weeks. He didn't flinch at the broken plate. He didn't even look at her properly. He looked past her, the way he'd been looking past her for the last 6 months. "I'm not doing this anymore, Amara," he said, adjusting his jacket. "I need someone who takes care of herself. Someone I can be proud to stand next to." "Proud?" Amara's laugh cracked in the middle. "I built you up, Femi. I paid your rent for 8 months when your business failed. I sat up with you until 3 a.m. helping you write proposals. And now I'm not someone you can be proud of." "It's not about gratitude," he said coldly. "It's about attraction. I can't force myself to want someone I'm not attracted to anymore." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had heard the small comments for years, the sighs when she reached for a second helping, the way he'd angle the camera to cut her out of photos, the jokes at family dinners that he laughed along with instead of defending her against. But she had never heard it said so plainly. So finally, "Get out," she said quietly. He didn't need to be told twice. He picked up his suitcase and walked out of the apartment they had shared for 3 years, out of her life, without looking back once. Amara stood in the wreckage of her kitchen and didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, in waves, in the middle of the night, in the shower where no one could hear her. But in that moment, standing over broken porcelain, something inside her simply went numb. She had spent years of her life shrinking herself for a man who never planned on staying to see who she could become. If someone had told Amara Okeke, at 28 years old, that the greatest heartbreak of her life would come not from failure or loss, but from a man deciding her body disqualified her from being loved, she would have laughed and called them dramatic. But grief has a way of teaching you things you never asked to learn. Amara was a senior project manager at one of Lagos's fastest-growing logistics firms. She was sharp, capable, endlessly patient with her team, and generous to a fault with everyone around her, everyone except herself. She had grown up in a warm, loving home in Enugu, the only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Okeke, two people who had never once made her feel like her size was something to apologize for. It was Femi who taught her that lesson, slowly, patiently, over 3 years, the way water erodes stone. When they met, Femi Adewale had seemed different. Charming, ambitious, full of plans for a future he swore she was part of. "You're not like other girls," he told her in the early days. "You have substance." She had mistaken his attention for depth. She hadn't yet learned that a man can admire your mind while quietly resenting your body, and that resentment, left unspoken, festers into cruelty. It started small. A comment about her plate at dinner. "Are you sure you want seconds, babe?" Then it became about clothes. He'd steer her away from anything fitted, anything bright, anything that drew attention. "Something looser suits your body type better," he'd say, and she would nod and comply because she wanted, more than anything, to be easy to love. Then came his family. Femi's mother made comments disguised as concern. His younger cousins whispered and giggled when Amara walked into a room. At one birthday dinner, an uncle joked, "If she sits on that side, the table will need extra support," and the whole table erupted into laughter, Femi included. Amara smiled through it, the way she'd trained herself to smile through everything, while something inside her chest quietly folded in on itself. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked him later that night, staring at the ceiling instead of at him. "It was just a joke, Amara." "Don't be so sensitive," he said, already half asleep. "You know my family loves you." She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, because the alternative, that the man she loved would rather laugh along with people who humiliated her than defend her, was too painful to hold. So she kept shrinking. She skipped meals before family events so she'd feel lighter. She stopped posting pictures of the two of them because Femi never liked being tagged in photos where she wasn't looking her best. She postponed the professional certification in supply chain management she had been saving for 2 years to pursue because Femi said the program's timing wasn't good for their relationship. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself love required sacrifice. She told herself a lot of things that, looking back, were simply excuses for a man who had already decided she wasn't enough, long before he had the courage to say it out loud. The final months were the loneliest of her life. Femi grew distant, his phone always turned face down, his responses clipped and impatient. She blamed herself. She started a diet she couldn't sustain, cried in fitting rooms, Googled things at 2 a.m. that made her hate her own reflection. And still, somehow, the breakup came as a shock, not because she didn't see it coming, but because some naive part of her had believed that if she just tried hard enough, he would stay. He didn't stay. He left the way cowards leave, cleanly, without a real conversation, blaming attraction instead of admitting cruelty. The weeks after the breakup were brutal. Amara barely left her apartment except for work. Her best friend Chinyu practically forced her out of bed some mornings, showing up with pepper soup and stern love. "You were not allowed to shrink for that man's memory the way you shrunk for his presence," Chinyu told her one evening, sitting cross-legged on Amara's bed. "He's gone. Let him be gone." "I don't even know who I am without trying to be enough for someone," Amara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then it's time you found out," Chinyu said simply. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. There was no single montage moment where Amara suddenly became a different person overnight. It was slower than that, quieter than that, the kind of rebuilding that happens in small, deliberate choices, repeated until they become a new way of living. She called the training institute and re-enrolled in the certification program she had abandoned. Her hands shook dialing the number, half expecting them to tell her it was too late. It wasn't. "We still have your file, Miss Okeke," the woman on the phone said. "Would you like to resume next month?" Amara sat on her kitchen floor after the call and wept this time, from something closer to relief. She started walking in the mornings before work, not to punish her body, but because the quiet air and the rising sun made her feel like herself again. She rediscovered old hobbies. She'd once loved painting and dug her brushes out from a box she hadn't opened in 3 years. She reconnected with old friends she had drifted from during the relationship, people who had quietly noticed how small she'd made herself and had simply been waiting for her to come back. Her parents, when she visited them in Enugu, held her the way only parents can. Her mother took her face in both hands and said, "Amara, nobody who truly loves you will ever make you feel like you need to disappear to be worthy of them. Do you hear me?" Her father, a man of few words, simply hugged her tighter than usual and said, "You were always enough, my daughter." Even before he came. Even after he left. 6 months passed. Amara completed her certification with distinction. She was promoted to lead a major logistics expansion project at her company, one that took her name to executive meetings she'd never been invited to before. She started mentoring younger women in her office, especially the ones who apologized too much, who made themselves small in meetings, who reminded her painfully of who she used to be. "You don't have to earn the right to take up space," she told one of her mens, a nervous 23-year-old named Ifeoma who kept shrinking her opinions in meetings. "You already belong here." She meant it for Ifeoma. But saying it out loud, over and over, she realized she was also finally teaching it to herself. Amara began dating again, cautiously, on her own terms this time. She noticed things she hadn't let herself notice before, whether a man looked at her with genuine warmth or with something more calculating, whether he spoke about her with pride or with quiet embarrassment. She learned to trust her own instincts again, instincts Femi had spent years training her to distrust. One evening, nearly a year after the breakup, Amara stood in front of her mirror putting on earrings before a work dinner and caught her own reflection properly, really looked at it, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She didn't see a body that needed apologizing for. She saw a woman who had survived humiliation and rebuilt herself from the inside out. She smiled at her reflection, and for once, the smile wasn't for anyone else's benefit. It was a Thursday evening, almost 14 months after Femi walked out with his suitcase, when Amara walked into Terra Culture for a colleague's book launch, wearing a burnt orange dress that fit her exactly the way she wanted it to. She was laughing at something Chinyu had said when she felt it, that particular prickle at the back of the neck that tells you someone is staring. She turned, and there he was. Femi looked older than she remembered, thinner in a way that didn't suit him, his confidence visibly dimmed. He was standing near the entrance with a woman Amara didn't recognize, but his eyes weren't on her. They were locked on Amara, wide with something between shock and disbelief. He approached her before she could decide whether to avoid him. "Amara," he said, his voice unsteady. "You look incredible." "Thank you," she said simply, without the apology, without the flustered gratitude she once would have offered automatically. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes." Against her better judgment, curiosity, or perhaps the desire for closure she didn't know she still needed, pulled her a few steps away with him, toward the quieter end of the courtyard. "I heard about your promotion," he started. "Ifeoma's sister works with you. She mentioned it to my cousin." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I think about you a lot, Amara. More than I expected to." "Femi, why are you telling me this?" "Because I was wrong," he said, the words tumbling out now, like he'd rehearsed them 100 times in his head and finally found the nerve. "I let my family's opinions get into my head. I let my own insecurities make me cruel to the one person who never gave up on me. I've dated since you, and none of it felt real. None of it felt like this." He gestured vaguely, helplessly, toward her. "You're not just beautiful, Amara. You always were." "I was too much of a coward to say it when it mattered." Amara felt something in her chest, not the devastation she once would have felt, not even anger, but something quieter. A kind of sad clarity. "Femi," she said gently, "do you remember what you said to me the night you left?" He looked down. "I said a lot of things I regret. You said you needed someone you could be proud to stand next to. Do you know what I've learned since then? Pride isn't something someone else gives you permission to have. I stopped waiting for anyone to be proud of me. I'm proud of myself now. I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly. "But if there's even a small part of you that—" "There isn't," Amara said, and she was surprised by how calm the words felt leaving her mouth. "Not because I hate you. I don't, actually. I forgave you a long time ago, mostly for my own peace. But forgiving you doesn't mean going back to being the woman who apologized for her body at her own dinner table while you laughed along with everyone else." Femi's joy tightened, his eyes glassy. "I really have changed, Amara." "Maybe you have," she said. "But so have I. And the woman I've become doesn't need someone who only recognized her worth after she stopped shrinking to fit inside his comfort." She held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for any lingering trace of the fear that used to live in her chest whenever he was near. She found none. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Femi," she said. "I really do. But it won't be with me." She turned and walked back toward Chinyu, who was watching from across the courtyard with knowing eyes, already holding 2 glasses of wine. "You good?" Chinyu asked, handing her a glass. "I'm better than good," Amara said, and for the first time, she meant it completely. 6 weeks later, Amara stood on a small stage at a downtown conference hall, a certificate of completion in one hand, the words Distinction, Supply Chain Leadership Program printed across it in gold lettering. Her parents sat in the front row, her father recording shakily on his phone, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a folded tissue, unable to stop smiling. Chinyu let out a whoop from somewhere in the back that made half the room laugh. As Amara looked out over the small crowd, she thought about the woman who had stood outside a family gathering over a year ago, frozen by cruel words whispered just loud enough for her to hear. She thought about all the meals skipped, the photos deleted, the certification abandoned, the years spent trying to earn a love that was never freely given in the first place. She thought about Femi's face in that courtyard, the regret written plainly across it, and felt no satisfaction in it, only a quiet, settled peace. Because the version of herself standing on that stage hadn't been built from his absence. She had been built from her own choice, made over and over, every single day, to stop asking the world for permission to take up space. The narrator's voice settles over the final image of Amara embracing her parents, her certificate held tightly against her chest, her smile unguarded and entirely her own. Some people will only recognize what they had the moment they lose the power to keep it. Don't wait for someone's regret to validate your worth. The right love was never supposed to require you to become smaller. It was only ever supposed to make room for exactly who you already are.